So when we're talking about cameras and their specs, one of the things that comes up a lot is the megapixel count. How many megapixels does it shoot? 18 megapixels, 30 megapixels, 45 megapixels. And maybe you were looking at those numbers and thinking, what does that even mean? And why is it important to me? Well, we are going to dive on into that here today because it is important, especially if you are cropping your images. We want to be mindful of the megapixels and the pixel count in the image, and also especially if you are shooting for clients, and especially if those clients are planning on printing that work. Super important to understand the resolution of your images. So even if you are not a numbers-oriented person, and I'd say especially if you're not a numbers-oriented person, stick around. I'm going to break it all down, make it easy to understand so you're more fully informed about what is going on with your images. What's shakin' bacon? I'm Joni Simon. Welcome to my studio. This is where I do food photography, and the goal here is to improve your food photography skills so you feel more confident behind the camera. And I know I felt so much more confident when I really understood what megapixels are, what pixels are, and what they have to do with my images, image resolution. It just really set me free and gave me a lot more confidence. So we're going to dive into that here today. This was specifically prompted by somebody who emailed me. I'm not going to out them because they kind of made some mistakes along the way and were like, make sure to share this with the Bite Shot audience because I don't want somebody else running into the same problem as I did, delivering an image that wasn't high enough resolution for the client because they weren't really sure as far as all the details of what we're going to get into here today. So stick with me, hang in there, let's dive into the pixels. So let's start with a basic definition of a megapixel. A megapixel roughly represents 1,000,000 pixels. It's kind of a measurement. And so we think about, well, what's a pixel? To me, the way that I understand this is just like going back to my art history classes when I learned about pointillism. It's that method employed by Georges Seurat, right? Where it's like all the little tiny dots all kind of clumped together in different colors, different tones, so that then we can kind of stand back from that image and see it as the overall picture. But then if you get really, really close up, it's a bunch of tiny dots, right? So for example, this is what happens with optical color mixing. When we take like a bunch of yellow dots and blue dots and we kind of mix those kind of in close proximity together and you stand further away, it's gonna look green. Even if there's no green present, it's the magic of vision, it's the magic of our brains. And that is what's being employed in a digital image, that it's capturing pixels, just like all these little tiny dots packed in together in order to give us this beautiful image. And the trick being that the more pixels, the more megapixels that we have packed into that frame, the higher the resolution is, the more clarity, the crispness, the sharpness, the more that that looks true to life, right? As opposed to like looking at my kids playing Minecraft. If you've ever looked at that game before, you've got all these little pixelated blobs and blocks and creepers and things walking around, and we can see those pixels. It doesn't look true to life, as opposed to the tacos here, which is the cover of my new book. If you've not pre-ordered your copy, you should. I've got all the details linked down below. There's going to be a lot of shameless plugs for the book. You know this is coming already, but we are going to dive into this image to understand the megapixel makeup of this image, especially because this is the cover of a book. We want to make sure we have a high enough resolution in order for this to be printed so that it looks beautiful and it doesn't come out looking pixelated. But so coming right back around to megapixels, if we say we are shooting with a camera that captures 18 megapixels, that means in every image that it captures, it's collecting and capturing effectively 18 million pixels. What? That's crazy, right? I think about my Nikon Z7. That's a 45 megapixel file. It's 45 million pixels. Holy buckets, right? But in practical terms, what does that mean? So let's just walk you through. I think it's helpful to see all of this and see how it all kind of plays out. If we take this example of the cover shot from my book, Picture Perfect Food, coming out April 20th to a book retailer near you. If we take this image and we go into the library tab up here in Lightroom. You can also find this, I'll show you in Capture One here in a moment with a different image. But here in Lightroom, we come over into the library, and you can come over into the metadata tab. You see we just drop down into metadata. We've got all this information. Again, making sure that copyright information is there. Super important. We've talked about that on this channel before. But now what we can see is the dimensions of 4016 by 6016. What are those? Those are pixels. So that means that it is 6016 pixels on the long edge and 4016 pixels on the bottom edge. So now here's where we do a little math. And I promise I am not a math wizard. I did not do well in math in school. Math does not come naturally to me, but we are going to do some math, darn it. So what we're going to do is take that 4016 and multiply it by 6016, because what does that do? Multiplying the bottom and the top, it's going to give us how many pixels make up the entire image, right? So if I multiply 4016 by 6016, gives me roughly 24 million. So that means I was shooting with a 24 megapixel camera. In this case, I was shooting with the Nikon D750, shot the whole book with that camera, 24 megapixels. You say, okay, that makes sense. But now here's where you gotta start to pay attention, is if we start to crop these images, which we do, right? Cropping is a super helpful thing that we do in photography. It's always a great idea, especially when shooting something, to kind of shoot a little wider than you need, right? Because you can always crop in, you can't really uncrop, right? So it's a general standard practice for me that I shoot just a little slightly wider, but you want to be careful not to go too wide, and I'm going to show you why. So we've got this situation where if we go into the develop module, we've got the image that's from the cover, but you may notice that this is not the final image, because the final image is cropped, right? You don't see all this top area, you don't see this bottom area, and I knew that because in talking with the publisher, I knew that they would crop all of the images down to 9.125 inches on the long edge and 8.125 inches on the bottom edge. And so knowing that that would be the crop, got that here in Lightroom, and I can go ahead and throw that over the image. And then I'm gonna go ahead and shimmy it down to what they ultimately picked, because a lot of times the publishers will do the cropping for you, right? You give them the file, and then all the fabulous designer, art director folks do their magic, and they crop it down to what they want. And so I know it was slightly touching the chip, and I know that it kind of slightly came in at the bottom of the jalapeno. So I think, oh no, it must have been a little bigger than this, right around there. Let's just say that's what it is. You'll have to double check the cover for me. Maybe it comes up a little higher. Anyway, we've now cropped our image. This is much closer to what it looks like on the front of the book. And so now if we go back into the library and look back at that metadata, still have the original dimensions of the image, but now you can see that it's cropped. It's changed the resolution of this image. It has effectively, when we cropped it, we are cutting off pixels. We are removing them. They're gone, right? So now the image is 3493 by 3922. So you look at those numbers and go, okay, great. What does that mean? Well, in practical terms, if we think about, and we go back to the video many moons ago that I did on export settings in Lightroom, and we think about when we're exporting images that we want those images to be sized for where we're sending them. So if you've missed that video, I've got that link down below. But if you've watched it and you're already up to speed on export settings, when we're exporting for Instagram, for example, I specify that I want it to be 1080 on the long edge. That ensures that it is kind of taking that image, condensing it down, making it a smaller file, so that when I upload it to Instagram, that Instagram's not going to compress that file anymore, that it's already like appropriately sized to where it's going, so that I get the highest quality on the output there. Now 1080 on the long edge, clearly if we have here a 3922 on the long edge as that original file, taking that down to 1080, no problem. We can always downsize a file, but we can't upsize a file. So pretty much for most web usage, you know, Facebook, doing maybe 2,000 on the long edge, different applications depending on what they're looking for. I used to work with a client that specified needed to be at least 3,000 pixels on the long edge. So just making sure to understand what's the requirement of where this image is going and making sure that that pixel count is high enough. Now, one of the ways that we can also pay attention to this is in thinking about the PPI, the pixels per inch, which is something else we will set on export settings specifically for print. So going back to what my publisher had said was, hey, we want to make sure that from a measurement standpoint, this is what we're going for. And then we want to make sure that these are exported at 300 PPI for the highest print quality we can go for. And so understanding then, if we take that 300 PPI, 300 pixels per inch, and if we have a 9.25 inch image on the long edge, we want to make sure that there are enough pixels there present. So let's go back, do a little bit more math, right? 9.25 on the long edge multiplied, if that's in inches, 9.25 inches, multiplying that by 300 pixels per inch, right? 300. We want to make sure then that we have a long edge of at least 2775, right? That we can downsize it down all the way to 2775 and we'll be fine. So in this case at 3922, that long edge is big enough, no problem. Even if we crop down even a little further, we would still have enough resolution for that to be quality image when it's printed. But as you can see, if you really severely crop in an image, or say for example, again, going back to my friend who reached out to me and said, oh, I can't believe I did this, is she shot some images in horizontal orientation that were needed in vertical orientation. So it was cropping off a ton of pixels in that final image, and it wasn't high enough resolution for what the client needed, and she had to reshoot the images. So it's just something important to pay attention to. My general rule for myself and kind of where I find a happy place is in just making sure that that image that I'm delivering is at least 3,600 pixels on the long edge. That yes, maybe some cropping will happen, but not like major, like severe cropping. But then this is also the reason that a lot of advertising photographers or other people in that genre will shoot with higher megapixel cameras. So like for example, shooting with my Nikon Z7, I can shoot something super wide and just crop in because I will still have plenty of resolution. And just as another example, we come over into this honey shot over here, and this is in Capture One, and we can see over here in terms of the size over in the process summary, it's currently at 4522 by 5653. Plenty big, nice large file, but we can see actually that's even been cropped. And you can see how here in Capture One it starts to show me what is that pixel count there on the top and on the side, and we can just sort of move that around and see what was that original file, and we can see that's a honkin' large file, right? It's shooting 45 megapixels with the Z7, and so I've got a lot of room to work with in terms of this image just because there are so many megapixels present that we can really crop this down and still have a high resolution, high quality, high detail image and not worry about getting an image that's pixelated. In the context of this whole conversation, my biggest piece of advice to you is just in making sure that if you're working with a client or your images are being used in a specific way, is to ask a lot of questions and in understanding what do they need in terms of that image, in terms of that PPI, or in terms of the resolution, in terms of what size is it going to be printed. Asking a lot of those questions so that then when you're taking these pictures, you understand, okay, if my camera doesn't shoot these ginormous files, then I know that I need to be a bit more conservative in terms of how wide I'm shooting that if I'm going to crop in, how much room I have to crop in, and just paying attention to those pixel counts. But it never hurts to ask a lot of questions and to understand what is exactly needed for where your images are going. But with that, I hope you have a fantastic day. I hope this shed some light on a mathologically related conundrum and that the numbers didn't lose you too much. But certainly hope you have a fantastic rest of the day. Stay out of trouble, and I'll see you later, okay? Bye.